Gina, I'm so excited to finally meet you. I feel like you've been at the front and center of my mind for a couple of weeks now. I've got your book in front of me, and I feel like we've like chatted a lot, but we've never fully met. So it's so wonderful to meet you. And I am so excited to chat to you and to have you on all the small things today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? We've been so in each other's circle for ages and we've never met. That's how these things go. But it's so lovely to meet this way. So fun.
Yay. Let us start the podcast as we always do. I'd love to hear a little bit about whether or not you have any kind of semblance of a morning routine, or if you have any kind of rituals or habits you like to practice to kind of set yourself up for the day, or perhaps if things are fairly chaotic and change every day.
So they've always been chaotic and changed every day for me. Even when I had an office, when I was working in advertising before I started campaigning, and even when I was doing that, I didn't even have a routine, and I had to go and leave the house and get to work at the same time every morning, and yet I couldn't get a routine. I struggle with that massively. I know a lot of people who find comfort in the kind of routine of their day, and it gives them a sense of control over their day and of themselves, and I think that would be really good for me, but I've never been able to get that down. But about 4 months ago, we got a puppy called P, and it's like someone just dropped a firework into our lives. Like, she just changed everything, and she was so difficult to raise, and she is such a drivey, headstrong, stubborn little gorgeous asshole. So she's really forced me to have a bit of a routine. So now I've been getting up at 7:30 ever since I had her, because she won't sleep in, and taking her for a walk, and that's been probably really good for my head. So that's kind of where I'm at now. I despise it, I'll be honest. I can't stand getting up early, but I think it's good for me that I've got a bit more of a routine now with her.
Little P is so cute. She's so cute. And what about, are you a caffeine person? Are you like, yes, you're a caffeine person.
Big coffee person, yeah. Coffee, that's the one thing every morning that I do is we have a Smeg coffee machine, which when I bought it was like, oh, I've literally made it. Jordy was like, you changed the law last year. And I was like, yes, but it wasn't until this moment where I had a Smeg coffee machine where I felt like I'm the woman, like I used to watch One Tree Hill and be like, I'll be like that. I'll wake up every morning and make myself a coffee at the breakfast island. Don't have an island, but I have a coffee machine, and every morning I make myself a coffee and I'm like, I'm just the woman I'm meant to be. And then it all goes to shit about 20 minutes later. But during that moment, it's really ritualistic and nice to make it for myself and just stand there with the dog and have a coffee.
So I love to give my listeners a really good grounding of my guests. And I was wondering if we could wind back the clocks and hear a little bit about your life growing up in Liverpool, a bit about your family and kind of some of your childhood memories.
Yeah, so interesting fact, but like I didn't actually grow up in Liverpool, but everyone's a Scouser in my family. And I was born in Liverpool. And then we moved outside of Liverpool. The reason I always reference Liverpool as my childhood and my kind of home, I guess, is partly because the affinity I have with it, because we were always there for my family and stuff, is so huge. And where I actually grew up was this tiny village where I didn't really know anyone, and there wasn't a huge amount of, I just basically went to school in this village, and we spent a lot of our time in Liverpool. But it's also a safety thing, because I've had like a lot of issues with my work and safety, and I had like a stalking case for 2 years against a guy from my school. So because I'm on so many platforms, I never really want to say the town in which I grew up. So I always reference Liverpool. But Liverpool has defined my family for like it's generations and generations of Scousers I come from. And my mum and dad are both, Scousers at heart. And they've been together since they were like teenagers. They're just really cool people, and they love each other so much still, and they're like really good friends still, and they just have a lot of fun together. And so I grew up in a family where I felt like very, very loved and very supported. Dad's not really he doesn't have a lot of the typical masculine traits about him. He's a very sensitive, excellent writer, brilliant with words, like wonderful man. And my mum's super, super creative, has had so many lifetimes and so many different jobs, and her brain is just like mine. So I grew up in this family that was very like, talk about your feelings all the time, do anything you want, you want to audition for the Harry Potter films, I'll drive down to London. I could talk to my dad about like being on my period and like buying tampons. And like when I bought my first bra, I was like, look at my first bra. And Dad was like, sure, that's great, but close the curtains. Like, you know, it wasn't super gendered either. And I wasn't very academic in school. My sister was brilliantly academic, but I was very creative, and I was kind of happy to be average because I loved the creative stuff. And I just remember growing up and feeling like just wanting to spend time with my family a lot more than wanting to spend time with friends, and just had a very happy childhood. And I think that defined a lot of the way I am now, you know, like I'm good at excavating my feelings and like exploring my feelings, and I'm good at, I just am very open, and I'm good at fighting for things, and I care about people. And I think a lot of that came from my parents and our very northern, cuddly upbringing.
It's really refreshing to hear someone talk in such a like loving way about their family, and they just sound awesome, your family. So yeah, thanks for sharing that with me. You actually started your career in advertising, right? Tell me about those kind of first early years and the kind of skills that you learned, and whether or not you actually enjoyed that industry. I'm really interested to learn more.
Yeah, so I did start it in advertising, and I studied fine art through school. Like I was always a painter and a drawer, and so I studied fine art through school, and then I did it in college, and I spent most of my time in college in the art department, even though I was doing other courses. And then I went to an art school for a year and did like glass blowing and textiles, and I just wanted to be an artist, but I didn't think that I'd be able to do it and make money, which is weird considering that Dad's a drummer, and he was like, do it. And I was like, no, Roy, you don't understand, you can't make a living that way. He's like, I'm literally a musician. But I didn't think it was possible. So I used to be really interested in TV ads, and I used to watch TV ads and be like, oh, it would have been better if they'd left that last line out, or, you know, I don't think that script was good. And I always used to just comment on them when I was really young. And I remember doing it with Dad, and Dad being like, you should go into it because you clearly enjoy it, and pulling apart why something works and doesn't. So then I went to uni and did creative advertising, and I studied that. And that was in Leeds, which is amazing. And then when I left uni, I kind of had to move to London because that was where all the jobs were. But I just didn't have, we just didn't have the money for me to live in London. It's just impossible. So I like sofa surfed for the first like 6 months, just on people's sofas. And then me and my creative partner, because in advertising, as a creative, you're a copywriter and there's an art director, and you're like a team. There's two of you traditionally, not anymore, but that when I was doing advertising, that's what it was like. So you would get hired as a couple and fired as a couple. One would do
Wow, no pressure.
Yeah, I know. And you have to really love each other because you live together, or we did, and work together, and wow, it's intense. And my creative partner was Jen, and she was the words and I was the pictures. So I was the art director and she was a copywriter. And we just had this real idealistic, like, we're going to make it and get a job in advertising, and we've got great ideas and we're just going to go for it. When I look back, I'm like, wow, because we sofa surfed, and then we lived in this old man we didn't know was like, do you want to come and live in our pub, my pub in the storeroom? Right? Yes. So if you can't see Venetia's face, well, maybe you can, but she's being like, are you going to be killed? That's the face she's using. But he like seemed really nice, and he basically gave us the storeroom of his pub for free, and we slept on a single camp bed in this like wooden room with all these like promotional, like there was like a massive Red Bull can and all these like glasses for the bar. Like we were just in a storeroom, and we lived there for 6 months. And we interned in ad agencies for no money. And like genuinely, we were just eating rice every night. And like he didn't have a bathroom, so we had to get like an easy gym membership for like £20 a month just to use their showers to wash and stuff after work. It was like mental. But became really close to Jerry, who took us in. And to this day, Jerry is still like my dad. Like he's the sweetest, most kind. And we found out that Jerry's been doing that for 15 years. With people who need a space. He's just been giving that room to people forever. And there's all these people who would come into the pub who'd be like, oh, because of Jerry, like I now have a life in London. Like he was the only one who allowed me to stay here, and I couldn't afford to be here. Yeah, I ended up living there for 2 years with him, and he decorated the room for us as a surprise and got us separate beds. And I worked in advertising, and I worked as an art director. And then I went away for a year, took a year out with Geordie, and lived in Greece with Geordie because Geordie was working on boats in Greece. So I went to live with him for a year, and then I came back after a year, and that's when the campaign started. And I did enjoy advertising, but there was definitely always a part of me that was like, this doesn't like, I'm not doing something that like speaks to my morals or my like soul. Like I don't want to sell people cars. I don't want to sell people whiskey. but like the skills I've learned in how to make people care about a product, or how to make like semantics, color theory, language, copywriting, how you can grab attention, how do you cut through, like all those things I learned, I just took all of those and did it with a cause, with Upskirting. And so I became really good at getting people to care about things, because I could get them to care about whiskey, and who cares about whiskey, you know, like out every brand I'd be like, this is why this brand is going to change your life. So it's like, of course I was good at doing it with campaigning. So it did teach me to be a great campaigner, and I'm so thankful for it, but I just morally, I just didn't love it. And so I just wanted to leave, and I worked full time as a copywriter the whole time I did the campaign. And then when I had the opportunity to leave and write this book, it was like, okay, this is the time, because this isn't my calling.
So you actually were continuing to work in it during your Upskirting campaign?
Yeah, so I worked full time 9 till 6 the whole time I was doing the campaign.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's talk about this campaign. Can you tell us about the festival that you went to in 2017 with your sisters to watch the Killers, and what happened at that time which led you to the Upskirting campaign, for anyone who doesn't know your story?
Of course. So that was British Summertime Festival, July 2017, and I was 25, and I'd just come back from Greece, and I'd just got this new job working as a copywriter about 2 months before. And in Greece, where I worked, and it was a very sexist environment because I was working on yachts. And I used to, like, you know, moor a yacht or like park a yacht, and there'd be a group of men like clapping, being like, couldn't believe a woman could like park a yacht. So like, and I wasn't allowed to do the job I wanted to do in Greece because I was a woman. I had to be a hostess. I wasn't allowed to go and like learn to be a skipper and all this stuff. So, and I guess I got frustrated over that year, and I came back, and I went to this festival, and I hadn't seen Stevie in a year, and I just really wanted to be with her because I missed her so much. And these guys were hitting on me and Stevie while we were waiting for the Killers to come on stage, and it was very obvious I wanted them to stop. I kind of said a few times, like, honestly, mate, like, can you just stop? I'm just trying to spend time with my sister. And it went on and on. And then this one guy started to get annoyed. He shouted something at me, and I cut back at him. And a couple of minutes later, I felt someone brush up against me, but I didn't think anything of it because I was in a crowd of 60,000 people. They also started laughing, and I could feel them laughing at me. And then there was one big blonde guy in front of me, and I looked around to see what he was doing, and he was on his phone, and he'd been sent this picture on WhatsApp, which was like a really well taken photo of someone's crotch. Like, and I remember looking at it and being like, oh, that's me, because I knew what I was wearing. But I just remember the image, like it's burnt into my mind. It was such a, you know, stupid patriarchal pressuring things. Like, I hadn't shaved, and I was wearing a thong, and my like underwear was slightly twisted, and like all of these things that I was like ashamed of that were in the photo, even though they were just my body and I shouldn't be, and no one should have been able to see it anyway, right? And because I was so humiliated and ashamed by the photo, like I grabbed the phone, and then he turned around and we got into like a bit of a scuffle. Like I slapped him, and he was like shaking my shoulder trying to get me to drop the phone, and he was this massive guy, like he was so scary. And then a few people in the crowd helped me get away, and he chased me, which was like a fucking nightmare. And then I got a security guard, and they surrounded me, and then he was like jumping over the security guard trying to like swipe me. He must have been drunk. And then the police came, and they looked at the phone, and they were like, and the picture, and they said, we've looked at it, it's not a nice picture, it shows more than you'd want it to show, but it's not a graphic image, like you won't hear much from us, I'm really sorry, do you want to make a statement? And I said, not right now, because I was literally crying so hard I couldn't articulate myself. So I said, not right now. And then they said, okay, well, we've made him delete the picture, which at the time I was like, okay, great, but obviously that was my evidence. And just to interject, we ask so much of women and marginalized genders, or people who have been in situations where they've been violated, or they've been assaulted, or they've been harassed. We're like, did you get evidence? Have you got witnesses? Did you report it immediately after? You know, did you alert everyone around you to what was happening? You know, we do this, like, did you get the picture on, did you get the phone? Like, we're constantly asking so much of these people who are in a situation where they're freezing or they're flying because they're just so terrified. And I did everything you could possibly do. I literally had like 15 witnesses. I handed the guy in, I had the photo, I went straight to the security, then I went straight to the police, and still it wasn't enough. And so when they said that, I just was like, okay, I guess you're right. And I just, because I'm so used to being let down. Like I mentioned before, I've had a stalking case for 2 years, and that ended in nothing. And so there's this feeling of like, right, sure, obviously. And they just said, go back into the festival. They didn't even kick the guys out. And then I spent the rest of the night at the festival just like performing I'm fine with my sister. And then I went home and I was like, just had this moment of like, hang on. And then I just got super angry and started researching it and found out it wasn't a sexual offence, but it had been in Scotland for 10 years. And then I just kicked off effectively a huge social media campaign because I was fueled by anger. And that's where it all started.
To have gone through something like that, and to have also felt presumably a lot of shame and a lot of fear by like talking the police through it, showing the police through it immediately after it happened, is like adds a whole other level of like fear, anxiety. And then to be told by the police that there's nothing we can do, and you've had to do all of that and go through all of it, like it breaks my heart. And also like shocked and ever surprised how many things happen where we're like, well, yeah, I've told the police about it, but like obviously nothing's going to happen. But what you did do is you did make something happen. You really, really did. You started a massive campaign predominantly on social media, right? So I'm really interested to hear about a little bit more about this campaign. And I think if people are familiar with it, they will have seen you get incredible media coverage, be on like, in all the newspapers, on all the kind of big TV shows. And I'm interested in that, but also like what went on behind the scenes, perhaps also like the less glam side of it, because you were also working this full-time job, like you said. So tell me how the next steps were and what that was like for you.
Yeah, so that's a good question because I actually don't think anyone's ever asked me that. I started this social media campaign, which is effectively me asking the question, why is upskirting not a sexual offence? I no longer am in a space where I believe that criminalising these things is what stops them. And my politics has gone to a place where I want to work in a space where I create discussions and community to stop it getting to the point where men do these things, right? But at this point, all I could see was I'm exhausted by these things happening. One of the first stages was collecting stories from people, right? Seeing how much this is happening. And there was like 12-year-old girls who were saying like, oh, I'm in a school in South Croydon where the teacher was doing this for 5 years to the kids, and they found thousands of photos on a USB of the kids, but he didn't get prosecuted because the law wasn't fit for purpose to prosecute every instance of upskirting. The law included voyeurism, which says that if you're in a place of reasonable expectation of privacy, like a changing room or your house, and someone operates equipment through your window or under a stall, that's voyeurism. But these kids were in a public place, in a school. And that was my problem, was that I was in a public field. And so the law was confused as to whether it could work, because it was like, well, you've taken your body into a public space, so you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy there. So this guy didn't get prosecuted for doing this to children for years. He just got fired and went back to his £500,000 home. And I had all these like young kids being like, and I could feel the pain in their emails and their messages, because everyone had had to see these, for all the teachers had had to look at them, and they were so humiliated and they didn't want to go to school. This one girl, I remember, it sticks in my head, she said, every morning before I go to school, I feel physically sick. Like I almost vomit every time because I'm so nervous about going to school because everyone's seeing up my skirt. And so I had all these people telling me these stories, and it was like, I have to do something with it. Just this like emotional, just raw feeling of like, I have to stop it. Like, I just have to stop it. And I don't even know what that means, but like, all I can imagine is like, the system is like this. And so I have to go to the system and tell the system it's wrong, and create something in the system which at least brings accountability to these perpetrators. And my thinking is a lot less simplistic now about justice, but at the time it wasn't. I was 25. And so I started the social media campaign. I started a petition. I started doing paid Facebook ads of like, why isn't this a sexual offence? I worked with Refinery 29 to write up and photo. I worked with Eliza Hatch, who does Cheer Up Love, to photograph people who had been through upskirting and tell their stories in a way that allowed them to re-own the space. We would go back to where it happened, we would photograph them, and then we would write their stories up. And I did a lot of media work like that. But I think behind the scenes, there was just this real just sense of like anger and like, I have to be in movement for the first time after something like this has happened, because every other time I've just been I've brushed it off and just stayed frozen. I've just stayed quiet. I've laid in bed and been like, rehearsed what I wish I'd said to the guy who pulled my shirt up at a club and felt my boobs. Like, what should I have said to him? And I've never ever done the thing I wished I'd done. And this was the first opportunity to do it in a big way that I could put all of the hurt into from all the other times and like make something good happen with it. There was a lot of like motivation and a lot of anger and a lot of movement and a lot of, it doesn't matter that I'm tired. It doesn't matter that I'm getting up at 5 a.m. It doesn't matter that my boss is definitely seeing me work on this in work, because it's more important. And the social media campaign did really well. And because obviously analytics and numbers and data from social, you can see it up front. You can see that 20,000 people have engaged with this. I took all those numbers to media, big media, and said like, the audience is already there. You're going to want to talk about this. And that's how I got all the TV stuff. But that's when it started to become uncomfortable. That's when all the like online abuse started happening. And I started getting rape threats and all this awful stuff that was like, all these guys were projecting onto me. And that's when I started to be like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. And I paused for a while at that point, I think.
Wow. So how long did you pause for? And also like, what was it that, I'm assuming the thing that brought you back to the campaign was like feeling like you had to, because you were hearing all these stories from all these survivors and victims, and like you almost had to do it for them and do it for past you, right? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, that's literally it. Like I think if it was about my case, I would have stopped about a month in. And it became so much bigger than me. And I was talking to these girls who don't even have a democratic voice. Like they can't even vote. Like they don't have any, they feel absolutely like they don't have any, they have their social media accounts, which are private because they're young, and they don't feel like they can talk about anything publicly. And then there was also, I had this 65-year-old woman who was a teacher, and like the male students had been working together to get upskirt photos of their teacher. So she'd been working as a teacher, and she was like, I've lost all my ability to teach because I'm so nervous now, and I've lost all my authority, and I'm terrified, and I can't talk about it because I'm a teacher. I can't publicly speak about it. So there's all these people who were in situations where they couldn't talk about it. And then it became, okay, well, I think I paused for about 2 weeks. I did media, and there was this weird dichotomy of people being like, oh, Gina's on the TV, that's really impressive. And then me feeling like I'm scared of going on the TV because all I'm getting is abuse from men. And so I paused for 2 weeks, and I partly because of the abuse, but also partly of like, what do I do next here? Because I don't think this is gonna, awareness is great, but how do I turn this into like actual concrete change on a system level? And that's when I actually was talking to a friend at work, and he said, you need to get a kick-ass lawyer, like a woman lawyer, like an amazing female lawyer who's just going to fight this with you. And I remember being like, oh, okay. So I paused, and I just sent loads of emails to law firms. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I was on like 25 grand at the time, and I couldn't afford a lawyer. So I contacted all the law firms that did pro bono representation.
Okay.
And I packaged up all the media, because the way to sell it in, I thought, was like, you're going to want to be the law firm that solves or works on this issue because everyone knows about it. And I think we need to change the law. And saying that was like, I don't know what that means, but I think we need to change the law. And I talked to a friend who was a law student, and she basically wrote me out like the basics of the law currently and what the law in Scotland was, and showed me in language I could understand, right? Because like I can't, even now I do read bills now because I have more experience, but I have to really, because they're like 300 pages long, I don't read all of it, and I have to sit there and really try and understand it because it's not accessible language. It's written by brilliant people in institutions that are highly academic, and it's so hard to understand. And so she wrote me this kind of one pager out and showed me that there was a gap in the law, and I kind of used that to go to law firms and say like, look, there is a gap in the law. Look at all this media coverage. People are angry about this. How can we solve it? And I eventually found Ryan Whelan, who worked for Gibson Dunn, and he actually just slid into my DMs and was like, I think what you're doing is amazing, and I really want to help, and I don't know how, but it can literally just be a coffee and advice, or I can try and get the firm to represent you. And I went to meet with him, and we talked for 3 hours, and he basically took a huge risk and convinced Gibson Dunn to take me on. And then we started a political and legal campaign that would take the new legislation to Parliament and try and fight for 18 months to get MPs from every party to back it, and eventually table a bill that would change the law.
A couple of questions for you. How, firstly, do you know why it was legal in Scotland, but it wasn't legal in the rest in England and Wales? Is there a reason for that? Did you ever find out why?
No, I think that, well, there's a political trend in Scotland where Scotland tends to, they're doing it right now with the 4-day week and stuff. They tend to take on these more progressive sort of welfare-based policies earlier. I'm not sure exactly why, but I also know that upskirting is a massive problem in Scotland with men and kilts. So
Right.
there was
Wow.
yeah. So there was a cultural conversation happening in Scotland about, oh, what's under your kilt and all this stuff, which is equally as problematic and not okay. And that was already happening for many, many years because of the tradition of the clothes in Scotland. So I think, and we know that cultural conversations lead to structural conversations, which then can lead to change. So I think that there was a bit of a faster timeline because of that in Scotland. And we also know that when men complain about something, things change a lot faster than when women complain about it.
Hearing you talk about, successfly changing the law, and that, that was a little while ago now. I'm interested to hear, and your experience of it. I'm interested to hear now. Would you say you're someone who is more focused on doing everything you can to change the world in the best way that you can under the system that we're in? Or are you someone now who sees yourself as a bit more of a kind of abolitionist? Where are you at with like politics in general, having had this experience of it now?
I'm consistently moving towards abolition politics. It's very, very hard for me to look back at that campaign and not in some way think it did a job. Specify it's actually not a new law. Basically, we changed we amended Section 67 of the Sexual Offences Act. So within the Sexual Offences Act, that now includes upskirting as a specified piece of legislation. So the first 2 men that we prosecuted, I knew through all my research and through the 2 years of working on this problem that upskirting was a gateway behaviour to more violent, repetitive sexual violence. I saw it in so many stories that people told me, and those stories will die with me. I will never talk about those stories or the specificity of those stories, but we saw so much that men, and it is majority men who perpetrate this offence, they upskirt, but they're also doing all these other things. And that was reflected in the first 2 men who were prosecuted with the law were convicted paedophiles. And the first man who was convicted paedophile has been a repeat offender for decades. And the second man was seen upskirting someone in the supermarket, and they found 250,000 indecent images of children on his devices. So what the CPS has found is that this law is helping them catch violent offenders because they can't, and they're not catching them as much elsewhere. So there's part of me that's like, I don't want there to be a prison system. I don't want Europe to have the most profitable the UK to have one of the most profitable prison systems in Europe. I don't think that criminalizing people stops them doing it. We know that offenders repeat because there isn't a rehabilitation program that is changing offenders' minds, changing their belief system, challenging them in a way where they have the space to understand their behavior and figure out how to be a different person or change their behavior. That doesn't exist. So I now know, after researching and reading a lot of work from Angela Davis and a lot of other people, that that's not the best way to solve these problems, which is why I want the future of my work and my politics to be in working with young people to unpick all these problems and where they come from before they get to the point of offending. When I was 25, I didn't know that. And there was a period of time beginning of this year, where I really struggled to like live in my body and like look in the mirror and like because I was so worried that the work I've done has really buoyed up carceral feminism. And carceral feminism is the idea that incarceration is the answer to all of our problems with sexual assault and stuff. That's where it ends. And I don't believe that. And I've been a great poster child for carceral feminism. And I really struggle to look at myself in the mirror with that fact because my politics has changed. But the reality is that I have another 40 years to do this work. And hopefully I can do 40 years of work that is going to help us prevent these things instead of just criminalize them.
I am so grateful that you shared that with us, because I think this is something that on varying layers, so many listeners, myself included, can relate to. And actually one of the things that I think I appreciate the most about your work is how honest you are about making mistakes, taking accountability for them, because that is how we progress collectively.
And I don't think I could sleep at night if I wasn't honest about that stuff. Like, I think that's what the work is. The work is about honesty and humanity. So if I don't have those two things, I don't really know what I'm doing. Like,
I am really interested to talk a little bit more about social media, actually, and like how that comes into campaigning, because obviously you being so forward facing during the Upskirting campaign led you to receive a lot of awful, like you've described, online abuse. Yet you were working with those, you were kind of using the platforms that you've received that abuse from to get your campaign out. And then last year you worked on Naomi Nicholas Williams' campaign that changed Instagram's unfair nudity policy, which involved an algorithm that prejudiced against people with plus size bodies who have larger breasts, and particularly black people. So you changed that policy with Instagram. So you're also like working with those social media companies to make them better, basically. So let's talk a little bit about that campaign and I guess your experience of social media in campaigning.
Yeah, I have a very complex relationship with it.
Right. Yeah.
I think at the beginning, I loved working on the campaign, the social media aspect of the campaign with Upskirting, because I felt like I could really control it. I could drive it. I could put things out there, make things happen, and then see the result. I don't care what anyone says. I totally believe that social media democratizes activism in the same way that, you know, housewives in America in the 60s were calling across states to organize the Jewish meat boycott, and they were able to talk to 5 people in an evening. We can now talk to 5,000 people in an evening. I really believe it's amazing. I do also believe in the difficulty in the conversation about performative activism. Like, I'm fully also behind that. But there's something really beautiful about using it correctly and responsibly, and using it as a tool for work that is happening outside of it. So Naomi's campaign was a really good example of that, because basically what happened is that I saw this was happening to her. We didn't know each other. And I saw this was happening to her. And Alex Cameron, who took the photo, had just DM'd me saying, can you help with this? Because we don't know what to do. Like, everything's being taken down and we can't get it kept up. So I contacted Naomi and said, I just introduced myself and said, I've worked in social media and I've worked in campaigning. And if you want to discuss like a strategy to try and do like change a policy here, like, we could discuss that. But I didn't want her to feel like she had to do that. But I was just like, if you need any help, I'm here. And basically what I was doing was what Ryan did for me, which was like going out on a limb and being like, I can work for you and I'll do it for free. And maybe I could help you out here because I have some access that maybe you don't, because I had all these contacts and all these people I'd worked with. So then she said, yeah, that'd be amazing. So we started working together, and I was kind of campaign lead. So I would kind of strategize, okay, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this open letter, and I would kind of organize that. And then we're going to put pressure on this person, and who do we need to get in the room to talk to about this, and how are the policies written and all that. So that was a really wonderful thing to work on, because it felt very full circle for me to be able to give my time and skills to someone else, because that's what Ryan did for me, and that's what people did for me during the campaign. So social media has played a really weird role, you know. At times it's been like the tool that helps me change the law. It's been the tool that connects me with people who understand what I've been through, like people who've been upskirted. It's been the tool that has brought more men into my life than I've ever wanted, who make me scared to leave the house. And it's also been the tool that has allowed me to work for other people to bring justice in their situation. So it's just unending in possibilities. But I think, to finish, what we have to do with it is we have to use it as part of a larger strategy when we're trying to make change. It is a tool, like a petition is a tool. A petition isn't a campaign. A petition is a petition. Social media isn't a campaign. Social media is a tool. It's a communications tool you use in a campaign. And I think if we use it more like that, we'll be in a better place in seeing that and the existence of discourse on social media as an entire campaign, because it just isn't.
You talk about it really, really brilliantly in your fantastic TED Talk, which made me cry. Such a brilliant TED Talk. It's had over 500,000 views. It's really, really exceptional. I recommend everyone listening to this podcast to watch it. And you also talk about it and write about it in your book, Be the Change, which is such a fab toolkit for anyone who is wanting to make a change, you really do like make this work accessible in a way that I don't think is done enough, frankly. We touched very, very briefly on performative activism, and there are just a couple of things I would love to hear your thoughts on, because I think you'll have a lot of thoughts on them before we start to round up. So it was recently announced that the revolution is indeed going to be televised. Usher, Priyanka Chopra Jonas, and Julianne Hough will host a competition series called The Activist. This is when activists will go head to head in challenges to promote their causes, with their success measured via online engagement, social metrics, and hosts' input. As someone who is really deeply involved with organising and has a good understanding of the media, what are your thoughts, Gina?
I could not hate it more. You look at TV entertainment formats, and they are based around concepts that are light touch lifestyle content. So like MasterChef, it's about cooking. You know, singing competitions, they're about singing. Activism is one of the most, for many activists globally, activism is one of the most dangerous jobs you can do. There are people globally right now in Afghanistan, there are women who can't call themselves an activist because they will lose their lives for being one. And the communities that we work in as activists, trying to elevate people and mitigate structural failures from governments, the people who are dealing with those structural failures are dealing with real life terrifying situations, whether that's they don't have enough food to eat, or they're caught in a war zone, or they're dealing with sexual assault, or they're exploited in their industry like garment workers are. These issues are some of the most serious and important issues we have in our society. And to create a show that pits people off against each other to raise money for people, firstly, completely takes away the collective element, because it's like, you're the activist and that's the community over there, go and help them. It's very savior complex. But secondly, the entire essence of activism is against the status quo, is community, is not for profit. It's about people working together to create change in their communities. And so all this does is it glamorizes activism to a point where it takes all of the human aspect out of it and makes it about people winning at activism. And the whole point of being an activist is not to win, it's to help people. And the reason I believe that they have those three talent as their hosts is because they couldn't get activists, because there is not, I know some people who are approached for the show, and that I can honestly say that there is not one self-respecting, hardworking activist or campaigner or organizer that would agree to go on a show like this. It's also going to really damage the perception of what activism is, because we have so little visibility for the people who are doing real activism and changing people's lives and communities already. Activism is so whitewashed already, which is another part of it I've been. And activism is turning into this sort of aspirational quote unquote job, of which it isn't. And this TV show is going to go a really far way in cementing that concept.
One little thing, thank you also for sharing that insight. That's really, really interesting. I also just wanted to hear if you had any thoughts about AOC's, who's someone I know you really respect and admire and look up to. If you had any thoughts on the dress that she wore to the Met Gala in New York.
Yes, I think that's a pretty interesting one, isn't it? I genuinely believe AOC is someone who is trying to make a difference in the confines of very hostile political territory in American politics. Look, I would love that capitalism didn't exist and we could all just be like, look, I don't go to nice things and I don't engage in lovely things, but the reality is we live under the system we're living in. The Met Gala was in New York and she got invited. She didn't pay for a ticket. She loaned a dress from a black designer who is sustainable, is ethical, and platform that designer, and she used it to give a bit of a political slogan. Do we think that her dress is going to change everything? Obviously not, but it's just a bit of support for a bill that she is actively pushing through. But I'm also not going to critique her. I just think the woman's probably working incredibly hard and wanted a night out and thought she'd go to rich people's place, eat their food and tell them to be taxed. And I thought, well, good on you. Enjoy.
I knew you'd have some fantastic thoughts. Gina, I feel like you're going to be up for a quick fire. Just a quickie.
I love a quick fire.
I knew it. Okay, quick fire with Gina. Wake up early or have a lie-in?
Have a lie-in.
Lattes or flat whites?
Flat whites.
Pancakes or waffles?
Waffles.
Jam or Marmite?
Jam.
Acrylics or oil paints?
Acrylics. I don't know how to use oils.
Walks or snuggles with P?
Walks, because I can't snuggle her because all she does is bite still. One
Twitter
day
or-
snuggles. One day snuggles.
Twitter or Instagram?
Just Instagram because I get less hate.
Writing or speaking?
Writing.
Fiction or non-fiction?
Non-fiction.
Podcasts or Netflix?
Podcasts.
Sunrise or sunset?
Sunset, 'cause I'm in bed.
And finally, routine or spontaneity?
Spontaneity.
Final questions. What is your one non-negotiable daily self-care habit?
Oh, I don't have any.
Singing? Drumming? Painting?
No, cuddling Geordie.
Oh, very cute. What have you read, listened to, or watched recently that you'd love to recommend?
Watched All In for Democracy with Stacey Abrams. Read Emma Dabiri, What White People Should Do Next.
I have it next to me based on, I feel like I saw you talking about it. It's on my list, like top of my pile.
Incredible.
Thanks. Those were really great and really quick. And finally, what is one thing you hope your future self will have achieved?
Able to make enough money to have, you know, a life that is like a nice little flat and go out for dinner a couple of weeks, like be because my family have always been, you know, working class and struggling, so like have enough money to have a small, modest but comfortable life, and have done that by sticking to my morals.
I love that. Gina, I feel like I could have honestly talked to you for another 2 hours. Thank you so much for being so generous with your thoughts. Thank you for your time and for your work. And I'm really, really grateful for you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for giving me this space to speak honestly on it. It's been lovely.